And hello again, everybody. Welcome to the Keith Costas podcast, starring, of course, Keith Costas. He is the MLB Network analyst. I'm Bob Ramsey, and glad you're with us today. And hello, Keith. How you doing?
What's up, Rammer? All good up here. A little rainy on the East Coast, but all good.
In the middle part of the country, it is absolutely gorgeous. And speaking of gorgeous, you talk about West Coast baseball weather, maybe a little bit warm, but MLB Network tonight has one of the expected to be classic clashes of the National League West, the Padres and the Dodgers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we talked about this at the beginning of the season. I know it was bantied about a lot of different places kind of heading into this year after they played in the playoffs last year, but there was some question, is this really a rivalry? Because you look at the numbers and it's been extremely one-sided, not just since the Padres have emerged, but going back the last 10 years. Dodgers have won the season series 10 years in a row, which is just 1 year short of matching the longest record in the history of the game since they went to the divisional era in the late 60s. So as well as they've got the highest winning percentage in any divisional matchup in that same span. So It's been complete dominance. And then obviously the sweep in last year's postseason. But you look at this year coming into this series, separated by 2 runs. All the games haven't just been close. They've been classics. You know, Tatis had a couple multi-homer games at Dodger Stadium. They've played extra inning games. There's been comebacks. There's been all kinds of excitement. So, yeah, plenty to look forward to in this matchup. The Dodgers, I thought this was incredibly interesting. It's shocking. We're underdogs last night for the first time since 2019. Now, wow. I know it's baseball and you can't predict baseball, but that just shows how good they've been. They haven't had any kind of spot start or, a cold starter or anything where the people out in the desert thought maybe this is a chance where they can get beat. Last night's the first time. And what happens? Padres score 4 runs before they record an out. So one game does not make a trend, but kind of a tidy little storyline for our purposes with the tides maybe turning in this rivalry a little bit, get a little bit more competitive going forward.
Yeah, and this probably doesn't go to your analyst role, but as a fan and I'm sure the network, little concerned about this series when Tatis hurt his shoulder a few days ago, but being back in the lineup, that's good news for everybody. Tatis, the Padres, this matchup, and when your stars are playing and playing like stars, it's good for baseball.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a little scare earlier in the year, obviously, when he initially hurt his shoulder. We had them around that time too, so everyone kind of heart skips a beat, think you're going to miss a big star. But I guess this is going to be a thing that just he plays through until ultimately he'll eventually have to have surgery, you would think. I mean, he's playing with a partially dislocated shoulder. He's had partial situations throughout the last couple of years with that shoulder, and it's just kind of a spotty thing. It's popped out on him 4 or 5 times already. So you'd think eventually he's going to have to go under and at least get it addressed in some way. But young athletic guy like him who's a complete freak and does things on the field that nobody else can do, I guess he can overcome injury too. And there's one thing that pops out when you talk about him being a freak. We get these numbers from the folks at MLB.com every week that work on StatCast. They give us a little info on our games. They had a number this week that might be interesting to Cardinal fans. Fernando Tatis, one of 5 players who's in the top 10% of the league in sprint speed and barrel rate. So basically hits for power and runs hard. It's not that surprising for Tatis. The other 4, though, Ronald Acuna Jr., Mike Trout, Shohei Ohtani, Tyler O'Neill. How's that for company for the Cardinals left fielder? I mean, I think everyone knows that he's got that kind of talent, but putting it all together that year to be in this kind of company, pretty impressive.
That's exactly right. And me, the lineup nerd, it's interesting that the Padres have kind of switched it around a little bit, moving Grisham out of the leadoff spot, a little more power spots lower in the order. And Tommy Pham, who hadn't been hitting well, but had still been getting on base. It's a little early, but he may thrive at the top of the order for them.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because the last time we had a Padres game a few weeks ago was when Grisham was on the IL, and a lot of what I was talking about with our broadcasters before the game getting prepped was, hey, when they get Grisham back, this is a guy who basically turned into what Tommy Pham was with the Cardinals and with the Rays. They basically had the exact same profile as a hitter. Walk rate was about the same, average, OPS, home run power, all the same. Obviously, both guys can run. And that was kind of the way I was framing it. Was like, Tommy Pham's a little bit in decline. He always has trouble staying on the field, but they've got a guy in Grisham that has turned into what they thought they had in Pham. But now you said it. Now Pham in the last 30 games or so has looked as good as he's ever looked. I mean, his on-base percentage is close to 450 over the last month or so. And Grisham's gotten off to a little bit of a slow start since he came back off the IL. But if he gets it going again, all of a sudden you slide him back up towards the top of the lineup, and you get both of those guys going at the same time in front of Tatis and Machado. And, Hosmer's having a really down year, really struggling the last 6 weeks or so. But you get those two guys up there in front of the mashers they have in that lineup, and then look out. I mean, they've already got a pretty impressive record, but with those two guys going and running and getting on base in front of those kind of hitters, it could be a pretty exciting rest of the summer in San Diego.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the guys a little bit lower in the order. I would put Myers in there as well.
Mm-hmm.
Having the studs at the top, and if Grisham and Pham can both get going, I think it takes a little bit of pressure off those guys. And then whether they're hitting fifth and sixth in the order, you'd like to think pressure's off, and when they contribute, it's a bonus. And I think it allows more for a feel where you don't have to rely on one guy or two guys. I've got to drive in the runs. I just think that makes it better for everybody up and down the lineup.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think people would be a little bit surprised at what the numbers suggested in terms of prognostication for some of those guys you talked about coming into this year, because coming off last year, you think, man, this is a super team. This is a stellar offense. And it is. But some of those guys we've talked about, Hosmer, Myers, even Machado, they all had career years in the 60-game season. And it is not going to be realistic to expect those guys to duplicate that this year. And they haven't so far. Not that they're having bad years, but they're not having, four. Basically, those three guys hit like Fernando Tatis Jr. last year. That's not going to happen this year. And it's not going to happen going forward in full 162-game season. So I'm with you. If they get more guys on base up in front, everyone slides down a spot, take a little pressure off. And with the way they like to run, guys like Hosmer aren't going to have to try to be power hitters. They can just be contact hitters like Hosmer always has been, line drives. And everyone likes to talk about his ground ball rate being a problem for him. But if you got guys on base and you're moving runners, you can work with a hitter like that, hitting fifth, sixth, even maybe seventh as they get a little more depth in their lineup. So I'm with you. That could be a big thing for them, getting those two guys at the top.
Let's switch over to the Dodgers. And we talked about Pujols when he moved from Orange County to LA, and where was he going to fit? Is he just a pinch hitter? And man, he has thrived as a platoon first baseman.
Yeah, I mean, I knew how they were planning on using him, and I knew that they had been using him that way. But until I started really getting ready for this game, I did not realize, again, small sample size here, obviously, but I didn't realize how great he's really been. It has really worked out for him in LA, or in Anaheim, I guess. He faced left-handed pitchers about 30% of the time, which is on par with league average. So there really wasn't any kind of concerted effort to get him in favorable matchups in terms of having the platoon advantage. Fast forward with the Dodgers, he's up around 55-60% facing left-handed hitters. He has more homers against left-handed pitching, Rammer, than any player in the National League. I mean, his numbers are against lefties, and again, we're talking about 70 plate appearances here. It could go down the tubes in a couple weeks real quick with the slump. But his numbers, it's not like he had good numbers against left-handers with the Angels. I know that's a tempting thing if you're not following every day to say, oh, well, Albert can still hit lefties. Not really. His numbers were better against righties than lefties against Anaheim. He was just deteriorating in every way. There was no way to sugarcoat it. He looked like he was done. I mean, that's why he got DFA'd. But now a big-time resurgence. They're basically using him as the cleanup hitter against left-handed pitchers. I think he started 8 of 9 games against lefties in the cleanup spot, including on Sunday when he hit another homer against left-handed pitchers. Right. So the Dodgers, last year's World Series, we talked about it earlier in the year, Rammer. It's like the Dodgers and the Rays. Everything they touch just turns to gold. And all of a sudden, this 40-year-old Albert Pujols shows up in a Dodgers uniform, and it looks like he's 21 years old again playing for the Cardinals. So I'm really excited to watch him hit tonight, and hopefully he can keep this up throughout the year, because he's becoming not just a fun, nice, kind of nostalgic story. He's becoming a real weapon for them. I mean, you're talking about a guy who's slugging over 700 against left-handed pitching, and they're starting to get healthy right now. Muncie's going to come back tonight. Bellinger's going to come back tomorrow. Seager's going to go on a rehab assignment, and then you're talking about really picking and choosing your matchups with a guy like Pujols, which has to be a little bit of a troubling feeling for the manager and the opposing dugout, knowing you've got a guy closing in on 700 homers just sitting there for the ideal matchup.
When you talk about those matchups and how he ended up, Pujols, in a spot where all these things are available to him and he's grabbed it and taken hold, you look at, the Cardinals, who did not do MLB Network very much good last Friday night. That didn't go well.
It did not.
They're playing Detroit now, and Miguel Cabrera, if not for Pujols, we might have been talking about him as the best right-handed hitter of his time, of his period. He's in the sunset of his career. Mm-hmm. Is there a spot for Cabrera to land like Pujols has with the Dodgers, or do the Tigers want to have him go out as a Tiger, hopefully getting 90 more hits and a few more home runs to get those sort of magic numbers, 3,000 hits, 500 home runs? How do you see Miguel Cabrera with the Tigers kind of ending this year, which might be his final?
Yeah, that's a good question. I hadn't really given it a ton of thought, and maybe it's just because I don't have the connection, obviously, that I do to St. Louis and Pujols, but for some reason, obviously, Cabrera's been an unbelievable player. I agree with everything you just said. If not for Pujols, we'd be talking about him as, is this guy the best right-handed hitter since Hank Aaron? I mean, just an unbelievable career in every respect. But I don't know. Maybe it's me. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. He doesn't strike me as much as a pure Tiger, maybe as some of the other players that have been with teams for a long time. Maybe it's just because I'm a National League guy and I remember him running around as a younger guy with the Marlins and playing in that World Series against the Yankees. And maybe it's just because Detroit has been down for a pretty good amount of time at this point, that there's just not as much wind in the sails for fan passion and everything. And you don't see fans in the stands giving him standing ovations. And it just, it feels like kind of ancient history when Miguel Cabrera was a big ticket draw. Pujols, even when he was struggling, he was part of a big market in LA. He was playing next to Trout and Ohtani. And even though they never really got over the hump, the Angels were always kind of in the conversation, at least, even if it was a negative conversation about him. They were a part of the conversation in the national landscape. And the Tigers really haven't been in that position. So maybe all that contributes to it. But I don't know. I don't really feel like there's going to be a huge push for him to end his career there. But at the same time, I'm not sure what they'll be able to get for him. It's not like the Angels traded Pujols for some great return. They just let him go. So in a rebuild, especially after the COVID season, maybe having Miguel Cabrera in the lineup brings a few more fans in the stands, which I'm sure all the owners are very conscious of after a year of no concessions, no ticket revenue. So maybe that's motivation for him to stick around there. But yeah, I mean, we've seen with Pujols, there's no reason to think Cabrera would be any different. Get him in a different spot, maybe a little re-energized with the pennant chase, and who knows what he could do. I mean, we're seeing what Pujols can do, and I would never count Miguel Cabrera out, especially against left-handed pitching. He still hits the ball hard, too. You look at some of the exit velocity data. I mean, he can't run, again, much like Pujols. He can't defend, but in the right matchups, he still hits the ball hard.
Yeah, and who's to say, and, pick a team, and playing every day or even many days, maybe not, but in any given moment in a pennant chase or in October, to say, I got this guy coming up late in the game against left-handed pitching, who wouldn't want that, right?
Yeah, and that's not a great place to hit either. I mean, maybe get him out of Detroit, a little more favorable ballpark. Who knows what happens? I'm with you. That'd be interesting to see if he could be moved before the deadline or even after the deadline. That's a guy who could definitely clear waivers and maybe land on a contender as injuries happen or whatever down the stretch.
We've talked to a couple of guys in the sunset. Let's talk about a guy that his career is just dawning on MLB and Wander Franco with the Tampa Bay Rays.
Yeah, well, we touched on it earlier when I mentioned the Dodgers and the Rays. It's just like everything they do. You can't ever predict what they're going to do, and everything they do seems to work out. Last year and the year before, Willie Adames was a big part of what they did, a good defender up the middle and had some good offensive numbers too. All of a sudden, they pull the plug, trade him to Milwaukee, and everyone thinks, well, Franco's coming. And now they've got this guy, Taylor Walls, who's been good at shortstop, and Franco's going to come up, and he's going to play some second. He's going to play some third. Who do they have at second? Brandon Lau. He's not having a good year, but he has more homers than any second baseman over the last 2 years. If you watch the playoffs last year, their third baseman, Joey Wendell, is an incredible defender who's having one of the best offensive seasons of his career. He's been great. He's sitting around 290 with an 850 OPS. So that's just typical Rays. This guy, Taylor Walls, is going to block the number one prospect's path to play shortstop, and he's going to platoon with a standout third baseman and a guy that they extended at second base. You just can't ever predict what the Rays are going to do, and they have this way of just churning players there. And Franco's played 95% of his games in the minors at short. I mean, obviously he's athletic and young and can move around the infield, but they're going to use him all over the place, and it's going to work out because everything the Rays do works out. So it should be exciting to see him come up for sure. I mean, the consensus number one prospect in baseball, numbers in the minor leagues are just silly. I think almost half his hits this year have gone for extra bases. He has something like 6 triples already in 30-something minor league games. I mean, just a really exciting player. So I think everyone's looking forward to seeing him in the lineup tonight. And against the Red Sox, whose GM came from Tampa and drafted him. So kind of an interesting little backstory there as he gets to the big leagues for the first time.
So let's put a bow on today's conversation, circling back to tonight's game on MLB Network, the Padres and the Dodgers. Give me one more little tidbit that kind of caught your eye, whether it's pitching matchup or who's hot, who's not. Just give me one more little teaser for tonight.
Well, Padres have a chance to win this series, and we talked about the dominance between the Padres and the Dodgers. They've played 26 series since the last time the Padres won back-to-back series. I mean, we've seen with the Cardinals this year, they've lost series to some bad teams. You're almost going to luck into a couple 2 or 3s in a row when you're playing 19 times a year. So it's pretty unbelievable that even with the talent they've had, I know they just broke through last year, but they had some players. You talked about Myers. Machado's been there for 3 years now. Never won back-to-back series against the Dodgers. They've really got a chance to plant the flag and say, we're here. We are competing with you guys. And then the other thing, we've talked the last couple of weeks about fans being back in the stands, and we're still doing the games remotely, but we do have a field reporter out there, my colleague Scott Braun, who was there last night, and he said that is the loudest that stadium has been, other than maybe I don't know if you remember this, the catch that Adam Jones made, who's a San Diego native, in the WBC a few years ago. The Padres people who work in the stadium told him that's the only time that the decibel levels have gotten as high in that stadium. The whole history of Petco, I mean, they haven't had a time to cheer for, obviously, but this stadium has been rocking the last couple of days, back at full capacity, and the Dodger series has really ramped it up. So, great series, great rivalry, and the fans really make it. And it's been a great atmosphere out there, and hopefully we'll get it again tonight.
I know what I'll be watching tonight. Keith, as always, love the visit and the conversation. We'll talk again next week. Thanks, buddy.
All right, Rammer. Talk to you soon.
That's Keith Costas and the Keith Costas Podcast. I'm Bob Ramsey, brought to you by Royal Banks of Missouri. We'll talk to everybody again next week.
An important part of being safe in the event of severe weather is being prepared. At Ameren, Illinois, we're prepared too. Prepared to restore power quickly and safely, and to inform you of local outages and updates on restoration times, with text alerts sent right to your phone. Sign up for outage notifications today. And check one more thing off your list at amerenillinois.com/alerts.